The news over the weekend, it was reported in the City Press newspaper, then by the news agency Bloomberg, that the Agriculture Department is imposing certain requirements on farmers who want to export certain goods to markets like the EU and the UK. It was claimed farmers had to meet certain black economic empowerment requirements to receive a permit to export goods like wine and dairy products. The department suggests this has not been properly reported. Dr Sifiso Ntombela is a special advisor to the Agriculture Minister, Thoko Didiza. Dr Ntombela, good afternoon to you. You would have seen the reports over the weekend. What changes are you making to which farmers can export goods to these markets?
Thank you very much for the invite, Stephen, and good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to your viewers. Indeed, there were some very concerning media publications over the weekend that tends to misrepresent or distort at least the actual regulations and procedures of how South African exporters could benefit into the arrangement that South Africa, these other countries, and Mozambique have with the EU market as well as the UK. Perhaps, Stephen, let me just provide a bit of a context what happens here. You will recall that since 1996, South Africa has had a trade relation with EU under what they then called TDCA. And in 2016, on June, South Africa with other countries then signed the new trade arrangement, if you can speak of it, which is called now the Economic Partnership Agreement. And that agreement provides a certain preferential for South African exporters to Europe, including some of those commodities like in the dairy and processed product, in what it called a tariff rate quota. So basically, certain quotas that South African can export under free quota rules. Then when Brexit came in 2021, South Africa used more or less the same template to sign also EPA with UK. Now, these two markets has these relations, and on annual basis, for those commodities and agricultural processing that qualifying for this quota system, the South African Department, the specific Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, publishes a procedure on how different exporters can access, can apply, be admitted and be allocated those quotas so that they can benefit into this preferential access into EU. This process, which was then published on the 1st of November for the upcoming year, which is starting in January 2024, like it has been the case since 2016, as I said, for the EU market, and 2021 for the UK, does take into a couple of mechanisms in place which has been agreed upon with industry and the EU and the UK. One of the things that takes into account, of course, is phytosanitary issues, is origins of the product, as well as the inclusivity, which is in compliance with the BEE in South Africa for that matter. Now, there were some of these are not new. There's nothing new that has been published. It has been the case, like as I've stated, and there's no exporters that are discriminated on racial basis or any other form of discrimination whatsoever. So we really feel there's media articles reported in factual information and really distorted the intention of what these regulations are all about. And there's no new information or enforcement that has been put with disadvantage any farmer forward.
Okay. So are you using race as a criterion? Is there a black economic empowerment component to this?
There is no race that is used to discriminate any farmer or any exporter in the agricultural space. When you go to the Agri-BE Act, and Section 10 of that Act to be specific, it encourages every state organ and entities to be able to consider the objectives and the goals of the Act in driving an inclusive growth. And that has been the principle in the Department of Agriculture and in the agriculture sector in its entirety, that inclusive growth is part and parcel of driving a sustainable and a competitive agricultural industries. Just as last year, in May 12 last year, the industry and the department signed what they call an agriculture and agro-processing master plan, which is another plan articulating the growth, and inclusive growth is part and parcel of what the industry has committed. So it comes then as a shock that there are some sort of racial-based criteria that are now being put by the government, which is not actually true. Inclusive growth and sustainable and competitive sector is what the industry and the ministry are committed to it, and will continue to be ensuring that also all exporters are compliant both on safety and phytosanitary measures, as well as those acts and legislative of the country that promote inclusive growth just like the agri-BE sector code, which is an outcome of a collective and a creative documentation and
right. Dr. Ntombela, you're going to lose us in some of the jargon in just a moment, okay? I mean, phytosanitary means that it's
sorry about that.
Not at all. I know you need to make sure that that no diseases go into the UK, all things like that. I accept that, by the way. I have no argument with that. I do want to come at you. Well, I want to come at you from the other side. Let me put the question. You can answer it as you like. As I understand it, the vast majority of our commercial farms are actually owned by white people or are owned by companies that are white-owned. And this is actually, it turns out, quite a difficult area to transform. And it seems, I think, there are probably two big reasons. The one is the ownership of land. We've seen a lot of political discussion about this over the last 10, 15 years. Very complicated, as you know. The other one, which I think has only recently become more apparent, at least to me, is about the right to use water in our rivers. And that's also been quite a complex issue. Because in a way, Dr. Ntombela, I mean, no one wants to disrupt farmers too much, right? We all need them to make We need them to make as much food as cheaply as they can. On the other hand, we do need to transform. So are we making any progress at all in transformation? We're actually finding it very difficult to do in the agricultural space, in the commercial farming space.
Look, I think you're correct. There are a couple of things that are on its own can be barrier to the transformation, or at least the pace in which we all want to see transformation happen in the agricultural sector. And I think these factors are not unique to the agricultural sector. They are cut across other economies of it. You rightfully said water and land, which are the primary inputs into the agricultural sector. But also the cost of capital and other form that tends to be a barrier is an issue. But Stephen, let me emphasize this point. Transformation is a difficult and it's an expensive exercise to drive, and the government and industries are also committed to do so. I think we often don't also comment on some of the progress that we've made. The sector today, when we measure what kind of output comes from the black farmers, whether it's small or commercial farmers, is actually now tilting over and above 10% the last time was measured in 2019. And we're going through that exercise again. We're hoping those numbers will be improved. So there's progress that is being made. Yes, it might not be at the pace we all want to see because of the challenges that we're making. So I think it's important as we look into the growth of the sector, we take into account also some of the industries that have performed actually better than others because of the structure that is different if you look into industries. I will give you just as a step up on this point. If you look like in the beef industry, almost 34% of the output that you eat, whether exported or eaten domestically, come from the black farmers. That is significant progress. But in other industries, like for example in the wine, which is much more capital intensive, and also the land cost in the province like Western Cape are much higher, the progress is much slower than in comparison to it. But there's a significant improvement from where they were in 1994 to where they is today. And I think the point is we start seeing these different initiatives like you've mentioned in the word are all meant to ensure that you create a platform that can drive inclusive growth and ensure transformation happen. But as that happens, one of the key things that we always have to emphasize is that transformation has to happen in the context of a growing sector. And we are very happy that the agricultural sector has doubled in terms of volume when it measured from what it was in 1996 to what it was in today. So it's a growing sector that needs to be transformed and inclusive as it goes forward. And that's what we're all committed to do.
It's very difficult to do, isn't it? I mean, transformation is hard generally, but it seems agriculture is maybe harder than other sectors.
It certainly is difficult to do and achieve, particularly in the environment we operate in where there's also not so much room within the fiscus to fund this transformation. But even on the land that you mentioned, when you're looking at the work that has been done by Professor Kirsten of Stellenbosch University and the agricultural economist Wandile Sihlobo, they've actually mentioned to say perhaps the manner in which we've also been measuring the transfer of land over and above what government has been transferring under the land reform. Let's also consider private transaction by the black farmers, which we know today we have a number of black farmers that have procured agricultural lands through private means. And part and parcel of that, it is part of a democratic dividends where now black people in the country are able to participate in the land market. So these tend to start now showing the progress that it made not only by the government, but also by the private citizens of the country. Even on land donation, you see more and more private organizations and farmers donating land to government and trying to support it. That's why three years back, Minister Didiza approve the land donation policy to give clarity of how industry can help. So as we start seeing and confidence building and partnership between the private sector and industries, hopefully we'll start being able to break some of these barriers like the cost, which we've seen now with the blended finance, where private sector says, including the commercial bank, say, how do we help you, government, to also ensure that there's access to affordable capital so you retain the productivity of the land that you've transformed to the black farmers, whether they're small, big, or large commercial farmers. Let's keep the land productive and working.
Dr Sifiso Ntombela, it's a complicated issue. Thank you very much indeed. Special Advisor to the Minister of Agriculture, Thoko Didiza.